Really wanna zig.
Hiya! Welcome! This is Minidisc Monday number 66, and it's the final part of this 4-episode mini-series this month, looking at the Spice Girls and their related solo albums that I have left on Minidisc to review. Of course, this is the conclusion of Spice Month. So we've looked at Spice World, the second of 3 studio albums, and of course the debut solo efforts from Geri Halliwell and Melanie C. All that's left for me with my collection to look at is the third and still to date final studio album from the Spice Girls, and of course their first without Ginger Spice, Geri Halliwell. It is 2000's Forever.
Went into the world, what a revelation. She found there's a better way for you and me to be. Look for the rainbow in every star. Find out what's certain, love's gonna be there for you. You'll always be someone's baby. Goodbye, my friend. Anytime you're searching, I can still feel you here. It's not the end. Gotta keep it strong before the pain turns into fear. So glad we made it. Time will never change it. No, 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 no. You know it's time to say goodbye.
Of course, the girls had a break from each other for a year, 18 months-ish maybe, during which Geri, who had left in 1998, had released Schizophonic, Melanie C with Northern Star in 99 as well. Mel B had released a solo album. I have never heard it, certainly don't own a copy. Emma Bunton, I don't think she started her solo career properly till at least 2001, maybe even 2002. And well, the less said about Victoria Beckham, née Adams' solo career, the better. The 4 Spice Girls minus Geri reunited in 2000 for Forever. Let's have a look at the packaging and the contents. The case is actually in pretty nice condition, really. A bit of residue and the usual scuffs and very minor scratches, but still retains its original hype sticker, and the case hinges are holding together well. The booklet is rather bland, really, concertina style. It's got lyrics, production information, and some promotional photo shoots, and it was a pick to fold back up. The disc, album cover, and we just need to turn it over actually, with all the track listing, the album title and logo, and is that a bit of legal bump there as well? Yes, it is. I finished listening to this album again just now. I think only the second time I've ever heard it in full. I'll give you my thoughts as we conclude Spice Month. So opens up with track number 1, Holler. That was, I suppose you could say, the lead single from the album, although we'll get on to why you may not consider it as so later on. And it was a double A-side with another track that we'll get to very soon as well. Now, obviously, the Spice Girls were trying to move with the times. They'd got a whole new production team in place, including, among others, the veteran American producers Jam and Lewis. So they were really kind of trying to get further into that American R&B market, really, and Holler is a very Americanized R&B kind of track, really. The synthetic guitar riff that runs through it is almost a complete knockoff of stuff that you've heard from TLC. And of course those acts in the States themselves, like Destiny's Child, who were getting really big at this point as well. I think the Spice Girls were sort of playing catch up a little bit. I never disliked Holler, but I never really loved it either. It just felt a bit too much like Cosplayers, TLC or En Vogue or Destiny's Child or someone to me. But a fairly good opener, and it was a #1 single. Number 2 is Tell Me Why. Apparently that was planned as the follow-up single, and the release was cancelled, although it did come out as a promotional single in some European territories. It was cancelled due to relatively poor album sales. This album got to number 2. It could be argued the Spices' time had passed by this point. I think they'd really peaked around the point Jerry left, if I'm perfectly honest. But Tell Me Why, yes, it's another R&B track, but nicely produced. If it had been released as a single, I could certainly see why it was in contention, and I think it would have done quite well. Track number 3 is the other A-side from the Holler single, and it is Let Love Lead the Way. I always preferred that, I always thought that was a better track than Holler, and I still do. There again, still very American sounding, light R&B, going into that kind of teen group, boy band or girl band, I guess, sound that America was really starting to get into. I mean, you could argue that the American music scene really came to boy bands quite late compared to the UK, with acts like Backstreet Boys having only really been established a couple of years or so before this, and NSYNC coming around to prominence around this time as well. But I do like Let Love Lead the Way. Track 4, Right Back At You, and that's YA. They're still kind of pretending to be American, which never really endears me for a musical artist. Track 5, Get Down With Me. These are pleasant enough, you know. I was expecting to really dislike this album overall, and while I'm not absolutely in love with it by any stretch, it's perfectly listenable for the most part. There's nothing on here that's dreadful, which is more than you can say about certain tracks off Schizophonic, really. Track number 6, Wasting My Time. Number 7 is Weekend Love. That was a bit of a schizophrenic kind of track for me, a Jekyll and Hyde, as it was a relatively mid-tempo pop song, and then there was like this really aggressive rap kind of about 2/3 of the way through, if you can call it a rap, from Scary Spice Mel B. I noticed the main thing about this album, although she wasn't the strongest singer in the group, they are really missing Geri Halliwell's personality throughout this album, whether they wanted to admit it or not. And perhaps Mel B with her rapping, and she did some other rapping which wasn't great on earlier tracks on here as well, but it just seemed really out of place. And I think Mel B was trying to take the mantle of unofficial spokeswoman, leader of the Spice Girls from the departed Geri. But that's my theory anyway. But just weird that that kind of real sort of hard-faced rap, and I'm using that term very loosely, would be included on a relatively slower paced track as Weekend Love. Number 8, Time Goes By. Number 9, If You Want to Have Some Fun. That's kind of a little more like Spice Girls of old, albeit, you know, you can still hear that sort of American team of producers influence in parts throughout that. I thought that was going to be kind of a real get up off your feet sort of track, given that it's got fun in the title, but it wasn't really. It kind of fell flat, and you know, the second half of the album is rather flat, to be honest. Number 10, another ballad that maybe harks a little back to Spice Girls of 2 or 3 years previous, Oxygen, and that was okay, but didn't blow me away. And then track 11, the final track, is Goodbye. Now that was recorded and released as a single almost 2 years before this album came out, so it feels tagged on really. It was the previous Spice Girls production and songwriting team. It was their standalone single that got to number 1 for Christmas 1998, their third Christmas number 1 in a row. It was included on here just because they could, I guess, even though for 2 years it had been a standalone single. It probably deserves to be on, even though it wasn't recorded at the same time as the rest of the tracks, obviously. But I've always liked Goodbye. I think that's a good song. I mean, it kind of felt like the Spice Girls' farewell at the point it came out. at the end of '98, but yes, they would return after their solo shenanigans. Nice to hear it on here, good track, and a nice way and an appropriate way to end their final studio album, Forever. This album is a very, very mild recommendation. I don't know if it's better than Spice. I think maybe in places, and overall it might be slightly superior to Spice World, believe it or not. There is some negatives to consider on Forever, notably the over-reliance on American songwriters' production, that kind of Yankeefied sound, trying to be a sort of black sounding R&B group when there were obviously at this point 3 white women and a black woman from the UK. Yeah, so I could pick holes in this and say as a farewell album, as their final in their canon, it is largely hit and miss, and it is, but there's enough that's on here that's reasonable quality, at least for pop fans certainly, to give it a go. Of course, no more Spice Girls studio LPs after this. They would reunite later on in the 2000s for a greatest hits album and a single, and of course they've had a couple, or maybe more than a couple, of reunion tours over the years as well. But there we go, that is Forever, and that was Spice Month. So thank you all for watching today. I want to say special thanks to my wonderful subscribers and generous patrons. I'm going to go now. We are back in 2 weeks to the normal fortnightly schedule of random mini discs from my collection. So please join me then to see what's coming up in Minidisc Monday number 67. Hope those of you who stuck with me throughout Spice Month enjoyed it. And until next time, I'll say my goodbyes and ask that you join me for my next episode of Minidisc Monday. Cheers everyone. See ya!